Okay, here, so we're gonna replace the carburetor on my 69 Westy. We're gonna put dual carbs. I just got in the mail from MP, so we're gonna do that today. First thing I'm gonna do is take off the single carburetor that's on there right now. So first thing we're gonna do is take off the air filter. I already loosened it up. Take that off and remove this hose because we're not going to need that for the dual carburetors. Once I get that taken off, I'll go ahead and start to remove the bolts here that hold the carburetor on. Take off the wire for the choke. Disconnect my fuel line, and looks like there's a lot of fuel there inside my fuel filter, so we're going to get something so that doesn't spill all over the place, and we'll come back. Okay, so I got the air filter off, and I got the hose off that comes from the oil filler to the hose, sitting right there. This is a pretty stock engine, as you can see. The only thing is that I did put some bigger heads on here. That's why I want to put the dual carbs. I took this bolt off already. It's a 13 millimeter. The other one's in back. It's kind of hard to get to, but I was able to do it with a regular straight 13 millimeter wrench. Next you have here is this 8 millimeter wrench. You're going to need to, this is to take off the throttle cable. You loosen up this bolt, and then throttle cable will slide out. Try not to lose this bolt here. It can fall out of your linkage, your carburetor linkage. So I disconnected this. This is the choke. All I have left is to disconnect this fuel line, and then I can take the carburetor off. I'm sorry, this is not the choke. This is the fuel cutoff valve. Looks like it was loose, so I was probably getting some leakage there, but vacuum leak. But the choke is actually on this side, so you're going to disconnect that as well. And so like I said, the fuel line's next, but I need to get something to put the fuel in. It's going to spill out, and I would recommend getting something to clog that hose to stop the fuel from leaking while you're working on your car. Okay, so we got the carburetor off. I also removed the distributor cap to give me access to this bolt that I needed to take off in the back here. It just gives you more space to get your wrench back there. So now we're gonna take off the intake port, and we can take off these intake ports as well, because we're not going to need those anymore. But we need to take out this center section. So I'll start by taking out these screws here. There's 2 screws that hold on the port on each side. Can't really see, that one's kind of hard to see back there. And we'll come back. So you're going to need to remove the spark plug wires to get to the intake ports, the bolts that are back there, those 13 millimeter bolts. So what I did is took it off, and I just took a Sharpie and wrote the number of the cylinder that it came out of, so when I put it back on, I don't have to get stressed out about that. So that's one idea. That number will probably come off, but it's just temporary for now anyways. And also I loosened up these hose clamps. The original ones are not hose clamps. They're not they're different. I only have one original left on this side. It's a solid clamp. There's no holes in it, and it requires a Phillips screwdriver, and these aftermarket hose clamps are flathead. So I loosened up this 13 millimeter bolt, and you're gonna need a special I don't know, socket swivel to get in here, because it's pretty tight getting your socket back here. The back one is not so bad because it's straight up and down, and you can get in there with the straight socket. But for the front one, it's kind of tight. The curve there on that intake is gonna get in your way, so this is what I used in order to get in there. It's a swivel head, and so that allows me to get in that curve. So I got the 2 bolts off. There's 2 washers in there too, so be careful when you're taking off this intake. The washers don't fall inside your heads. I also dusted off a little bit here in my bay. You can see it's pretty bad, but I try to just clean up around here so when I take the intake off, no dust gets into my intake valves. Another trick you might want to try is using a magnet and using it to take the washers off of these intakes. I didn't trust myself pulling these intakes off and catching the washer at the same time, so I just use this to pull the washers out before I take off this intake. The other thing is that after I loosen up these hose clamps, you can slide this gasket over, this seal, you can slide it over and you can see where the intake connects to the center section of this intake manifold. So now it's pretty loose, and hopefully I'll be able to take this off without having to take off my fan shroud, but we'll see. Forgot to mention, when you're taking off your spark plug wires, be careful and not to pull on the actual wire itself, but try to pull on this orange. So I took off the other bolts, 13mm bolts that hold on this intake port on this side, and slid the gasket over, but it's not very loose, not too much play. So what I'm going to have to do is now to loosen up the intake, the center section of the intake port, and see if I can get some more freedom in here to move these parts around and hopefully take them out. I'm trying to avoid having to take off the alternator to take off this center section, but I don't know if I'm going to have any luck with that. It's been a while since I've done this, so I can't remember if I have to take the alternator off or not. Anyways, I got to take this off. These bolts here, I have Allen bolts in here because the original ones were pretty badly corroded. So there's going to be some nuts on the other side holding these together. So you're going to want to take these two off, and then you're going to need some plugs to cover up these preheater tubes. These preheat tubes where it goes into the exhaust. You're going to need to cover that up because you're going to have a hole here once you take off the center section of the intake manifold. So I'll come back after I take these bolts off. So I got the 2 bolts off here, 2 bolts off here, 2 screws off, sorry, and there's 2 bolts on the opposite side. So I actually used my magnet to hold the bolts on the other side so they wouldn't turn while I was taking this off. And once I got the center section loose, I was able to take off this side, this intake, which is right there. But I can't take off this side, and I'm not going to be able to take the center section out because it's not going to get past the alternator. So I'm going to have to take the alternator off. I'm sorry. I'm going to leave the alternator on. I'm just going to loosen the strap that holds the alternator to the alternator stand. Here it is here. Just loosen it up and you can slide it back, and that allows you to lift the alternator off the alternator stand. But you got to take off the belt here. So once I can get the alternator loose from the alternator stand, I'll be able to lift the entire fan shroud, hopefully up high enough to where I can pull out the center section here. And the only other option is to take the entire engine out, which I don't feel like doing right now, so let's see how this goes. So it took a little bit more than I expected. I needed to lift up the fan shroud You got to take the throttle cable out so you can get it to lift as far as you need it. And I actually had to take out the distributor so I could get the angle to pull the center section of the intake manifold out, but it's out. So my next challenge is trying to decide what I'm going to do with this piece here. This is where the original stock air filters rest at, but it's going to be in the way of the carburetor. The dual carburetor is going to stand right there, so it's going to be in the way. This side's not a problem. So we'll be back. Here we go. Here's the package that these MP dual port 34 pick carburetors came in. So I'm going to open up the package and see what I got. Alright, so as you can see, I've got intake out. It's time to put the new carbs in, so I started assembling them. Hit a little roadblock. I'm not sure if I got the brackets on there right, so I'm going to have to figure that out as I go along. But one of the things that happens when you're putting dual carbs on a bus is, depending on what your bus you have this thing in the way. This is to hold the air cleaner. I tried to bend it up, didn't work too well, so I'm gonna have to resort to some power tools here. Just when you pick this up, it's a air cutting tool. It's only $10 at Harbor Freight, so we're gonna see how it works. And it's pretty small, so I'll be able to get in there and cut that out, hopefully. Yeah, unfortunately I don't want to cut it, but don't really know any other options, so that's what I'm going to go with right now. Okay, so we've run into a little bit of a challenge here with this intake manifold. One thing I noticed is when I was trying to put this, it's actually a 12mm bolt that goes on here. I couldn't fit the socket on there, and getting a wrench back in there while your engine's installed is really tough and tight. So what I did is just took my grinder and grinded away a little bit of this side here so I could get a 12mm socket down in here to tighten it up, especially the back bolt. It's really hard to get in there. So that's just a tip. I don't know if they all come like that, or maybe mine just were they forgot to grind away some of the material. It's pretty thick, so you don't have to worry about messing up the intake, and you only need to take off like about 1 millimeter and you should be fine. So we're back here. Had some challenges last night, had to call it quits. Got dark on me, but got a lot of progress. I had to cut off the mount there for the air cleaner, the stock air cleaner. I know the purists are gonna hate me for that, but if you want to go fast, you gotta make changes. Anyways, so we're gonna pick up where we left off yesterday. I'm gonna have to take the carburetors back off because the spacers are not on there right, and I'll show you that. So this is what I wanted to show, was that when the carburetors came shipped, they had the spacers installed in the wrong spot. In the video that MP provides on how to install your carburetors, it tells you to check to make sure that these spacers are correct, and these are not correct. That's probably why they tell you to check, and I just thought that I would ignore that. So I need to pay attention to the video and make sure I change these. So even though they shipped them to me like this, they shipped them the wrong way. So I got to take this little spacer out here and put it on this side, and put the big spacer on this side. That's going to allow clearance when I install this. There's going to be a linkage that goes through this hole here, and bolt that holds it on the other side is going to hit on the return spring, so I need to make that change. I already tightened up the screw and all that, so I'm going to have to undo that, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. So wanted to explain a little bit better what I'm talking about here. This is where the spring and the everything is controlled by the throttle. So there's this bolt here, it's 12 millimeter, then there's this lock washer type of thing, and it has a little tab on there, and then there's this holds a return spring, and then there's this skinnier washer, and then there's this piece. And so you want to take off this fatter one and put the skinny one on the inside. Put this back on. Put the fat one back on. Put this on. Then your washer. So this is a correct order that it's supposed to be. It's going to allow clearance for the different parts, but mainly for the bolt that holds the that goes. There's a screw that goes through here, and there's a bolt that sits on the other side, and it's going to hit this inner spring retainer that hooks up to your bracket up here. So when I put that on, I'll show you. So here's the piece I was talking about here. This bar here is a 10 millimeter bolt on the back, and so you want it to have the bigger spacer so you have enough clearance, even though it looks like it's still touching the return spring. It still gives you more clearance with the wider spacer. So this is the piece that you bolt on. The other thing is, one of these is longer than the other. This is a longer one. The shorter one goes on the passenger side carburetor. So make sure you put this longer one on the driver's side. And they say be careful when you're tightening up this, because this is a nylon threaded lock nut, so you don't have to worry about torquing it too much, because you can break this stud that comes out of here. And so you just tighten it snug and it should stay.